Are you tired of self-doubt holding you back? Have you ever wished you could have the confidence to face your fears, go after your wildest dreams, and the tools necessary to live your best life? Hey there, amazing listeners. I'm your host and author of How to Grasp Confidence and Own Your Power. And I've made it my mission to help you break free from self-doubt and embrace confidence. Subscribe now and join us as we unlock the secrets to unshakable self-assurance. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara LaFon Gooch, and I'm the host of Grasp Confidence Podcast, and I have a special co-host with me today. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Kelly Buckley, and I am the host of Broken Beautiful Me, a podcast that tells stories about gratitude, hope, and resilience.
And together, we are interviewing one of the most influential people that really has one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard of. That's for sure. Kelly, don't you think so?
Oh, I am so excited to talk to Dr. Alexander. I think it's going to be just phenomenal. I have so many questions.
Yes. So we're doing this special show together because we're going to pull elements of personal development, elements of spirituality, and contemplating existence itself. This is a very deep episode, everyone. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I want to introduce our next guest. Dr. Eben Alexander III is a former neurosurgeon and best-selling author, known for his near-death experience during a coma caused by bacterial meningitis in 2008. His experience detailed in A Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife, challenged his scientific beliefs and led him to explore the nature of consciousness and the afterlife. Dr. Alexander now advocates for a deeper understanding of consciousness and the eternal soul through his writing and speaking engagements. Dr. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Well, Tara and Kelly, it's great to be here today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. Kelly, I would love for you to start us off, and let's pick his brain a little bit because I just want to know more about this incredible story. Kelly, I know you have a fantastic question.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was to begin for our listeners who may not be aware of your book or have read your book. So if we could just start with you sharing a little bit about your personal journey and, the experiences that you had that led to the beautiful book.
Okay, well, I'll give you a brief kind of thumbnail vision of it all. At the time this happened, I was 54 years old, had spent my life honing a very scientific worldview, and thought that, physicalism or materialism was the correct answer. That is that the entire universe just consists of the physical stuff that we can measure and that we consist of, et cetera, and that it all follows the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. The problem is that sooner or later you run into a big issue in trying to explain the nature of consciousness and free will with that model, especially because consciousness is much broader than just our little kind of mental phenomena. And this is something that's revealed in near-death experiences. Now, the reason my near-death experience was so important to the scientific community, and that's where very much of my support really lies in sharing the story, is because of the depth of my coma. The Glasgow coma scales, the extreme illness, and when you look at the medical parameters, and they are corroborated in a medical case report, so not just what I told in the book Proof of Heaven, where I gave a lot of my medical details, but also a medical case report by 3 doctors not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery because it was unprecedented in the medical literature. And that's really the value of my particular case to the NDE literature, is for me to have any kind of phenomenal experience is really inexplicable. because there was so much damage to all lobes of my brain. And modern neuroscience feels that the neocortex, the outer surface of the brain, is what really does all the human part of our consciousness. And that's why meningitis is such a perfect model for human death, especially in an extremely severe case of gram-negative bacterial meningitis like I had. There was no way for my brain to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination. That much is pretty much agreed upon by reviewing the medical records. So where did that extraordinary experience come from? And likewise, the recovery. It truly is unprecedented to be so sick from this type of meningitis, be in deep coma for a week, and then end up making a full recovery, which happened to me over about 2 months after awakening from coma. And that extraordinary recovery demands an explanation. And in fact, when the peer review editors for the journal challenged the 3 authors who wrote the report, they were not involved in my care, but fascinated by that recovery, and said, how do you explain this? It's unprecedented. They said, well, this miraculous recovery is because he had a near-death experience. And they knew of other cases, like Anita Morjani, who wrote the book Dying to Be Me, and she had an advanced stage 4 lymphoma, and that lymphoma just disappeared after her profound near-death experience, a deep spiritual journey. Likewise, Dr. Mary C. Neal, orthopedic surgeon, who wrote a book called To Heaven and Back, and she had a profound NDE during a kayaking accident in Chile, where she had an over 30-minute warm water drowning, was brought to the surface dead, and yet she ended up making a full recovery. She also had a rich spiritual journey. So the big message to all of us from a scientific perspective is that this reveals something about our soul and about our free will that goes far beyond materialist misconceptions. And in fact, some of my greatest support has come from scientists who, heard my story, have reviewed the medical details, and realized that this all points to a much grander universe than the simplistic and kind of false, bleak and paltry fiction of materialism that pretends that the brain creates consciousness and that when we die, consciousness stops. It doesn't. There's a tremendous body of evidence, as we discuss in our 3rd book, Living in a Mindful Universe, evidence for the reality of soul and continuation of conscious awareness after permanent bodily death. And this is where the scientific community is really going to help elevate and change this world, because for the scientists who take all this seriously and study these cases, they indicate something far more profound about the nature of consciousness, about our relationship with the universe, our whole sense of meaning and purpose in this lifetime is dramatically supported in a very positive fashion by acknowledging that the brain is not the creator of consciousness, but is simply a filter or transceiver that allows us to connect to a primordial universal consciousness, to that God mind that so many near-death experiencers come to witness during their NDE, and they come back to this world knowing there's nothing to fear about death, that in fact it's not the end of our relationship with loved ones, that our souls continue on. So there's a tremendous amount of comfort that can come from this enhanced view that admits to the data as opposed to denying and debunking it, which is what materialist science has done for so long. And I'll also just put into this discussion that quantum physics, which is right at the heart of some of the deepest mystery of the last century of scientific investigation, is right at the core of this intersection of the physical world and the mental realm. And it shows really the primacy of the mental. That's why that Nobel Prize in 2022 for entanglement, the apparent connection of subatomic particles beyond space and time, is so important in coming to a deeper understanding of the brain-mind connection and the nature of reality. And it's a view that greatly honors consciousness as kind of unified and primordial. And that is something that all of our minds are part of. This is a tremendous scientific revolution. It's of tremendous benefit because it truly supports that we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe. The reality of soul, the importance of the binding force of love, which is an undeniable core issue revealed by near-death experiences, shared death experiences, which are just like near-death, but happen to people who are perfectly healthy. like a loved one who might be 1,000 miles away. So at any rate, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but the bottom line is my experience and the serious scientific investigation of these kinds of phenomena has greatly expanded our knowing of the nature of reality. And it's a reality that's far more comforting to the individual because it opens up the grand possibilities of free will and eternity of soul and of our soul relationships. And for this, you can never forget gratitude, because every breath is an incredible gift. And that's one thing I've come to realize in my daily meditations. I meditate an hour or two a day using sacred acoustics or my binaural beat brainwave entrainment. But all of this is about spiritual growth that each and every one of us has the power to pursue, because we're all conscious, sentient beings. And this revolution is just in the nick of time, because the bleak and paltry fiction of materialism and that false sense of separation has led us into a kind of a dark place in human development. And it's really time to awaken to these much grander possibilities of unification in the binding force of love, and that we have shared meaning and purpose in our lives.
Wow. Well, you're speaking both Kelly and I's language, first off, especially with gratitude. Yes. That is something that we are both practitioners of. We like to consider ourselves teachers of gratitude. And I'm on my third book, and I'm going to be talking a lot about gratitude and the spirituality of it too, and how that it really bridges the connection with God. It's a prayer. It's a continuous prayer and practice that brings you into that same energy as the divine. And it's so powerful, Eben, what you said there. And I'm wondering, from a personal development perspective, what you said as well about the eternal soul. And so much possibility, so much purpose that we have and potential that we all have. Don't you think?
Well, I think that is really gets right to the core of the issue. Because if you truly follow our conventional scientific worldview, you would scoff at anyone who claims to have free will. And the mistake they make is they think, oh, well, we're all just physical beings in this physical universe that we can measure. And this thing we call consciousness must just be the result of the electron fluxes and chemical reactions in the brain. But they're all just following the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, which really leaves no place whatsoever for free will. And the mistake they're making is thinking that we have access to some fundamental reality in this world. And that's why, that is in the theater of space and time, along the lines of what science has studied, for centuries and tried to make sense of. And what they fail to acknowledge is what we're actually experiencing is a very heavily filtered version of some reality. And yet, one of the deepest lessons of quantum physics that has vexed the scientific community for the better part of a century and is only now finally at a point where we're getting to some kind of resolution and understanding is the concept of consciousness as being fundamental. That is, this phenomenal witnessing we have, and our interaction with those kind of the phenomenology of our mental experience is what actually drives the way the universe goes, because it's all fundamentally mental, not fundamentally material. And the material or physical universe emerges from the mental. And this is one of the most important ingredients of understanding why that Nobel Prize in 2022 for entanglement of subatomic particles was so critical. Now, there are many quantum physicists who simply will say that, there's going to be some other kind of mechanistic material explanation for entanglement. And yet they obviously just haven't studied consciousness enough. Because once you study consciousness, especially all the evidence for non-local consciousness, like remote viewing, like telepathy, read Guillaume Playfair's book on twin telepathy, you'll find more than 35% of identical twins have very powerful telepathic experiences. One twin might touch a hot stove. The other twin can be 1,000 miles away and feels pain and develops a blister. Now, those are real phenomena when you study them. Now, people will say, well, I haven't had telepathy, so it can't be real. Well, when you study it scientifically, you'll find telepathy is a very real phenomenon. And if you open your belief system, you'll soon start to find that you have the powers of telepathic communication with others too. So then you have remote viewing, which is probably one of the most widely supported, kind of scientifically studied aspects of non-local consciousness. You've heard of the psychic spy programs, of remote viewers being able to discern military intelligence, across the globe. I mean, some of the remote viewers, for example, Ingo Swann was able to remote view the blue ring of Jupiter back in 1973, 6 years before the Voyager spacecraft went by Jupiter and imaged the blue ring of Jupiter. So remote viewing is a very powerful technique for accessing knowledge. And as Jessica Utz, the head of the American Statistical Association, said in her presidential address in 2015, remote viewing, telepathy, precognition, these things have been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. If they weren't so sensitive, because they suggest the reality of a spiritual universe and of a universal consciousness, they would have been admitted by science to being real long time ago. And yet they hit a touch point because we've had such a conflict in our culture over centuries between some form of spirituality or maybe a religion and science and scientific investigation. But in the 20th and early 21st century, we finally found the evidence that consciousness truly is something fundamental and not just derivative from the material, and that the brain seems to be serving more as a filter or transceiver that allows consciousness to express as a little eddy current of that primordial mind. And yet when we die, we reunite with that primordial mind. That's what near-death experiences, life reviews, your entire life flashing before your eyes, birth to death, everything in between, simultaneously presented, and not just as memories, but as reliving of the events. And the other important thing to say about life reviews, and this is not just from my experience, but from Bruce Grayson, an MD at University of Virginia, and he's written on more than 700 life reviews in his extensive database on near-death experiences, and reports that something like 74% see a life review as from the perspective of everybody involved. That's why it's like the golden rule written into the fabric of the universe, because if you've handed out a lot of pain and suffering to other people, in your life review, you get on the receiving end of that kind of thinking and behavior. And if it's very painful to others, you get to feel that pain. So the life review really is treat others as you would like to be treated, because in the life review, you're going to feel what it feels like to have treated people the way you lived your life. And that's why it serves as a gentle course correction to gently nudge us towards love and compassion and kindness, mercy, acceptance, and of course, never forget gratitude. These are the main ingredients that are suggested by near-death experiences. And now that the scientific community is taking them very seriously as a real aspect of human existence, we're coming up with much better models of how it all works. And for any of your audience who want to see the indisputable scientific proof of the reality of the afterlife and of reincarnation, because that is a giant part of it all, go to bigelowinstitute.org. You will find 29 essays that were written in 2021 in an essay contest, and they all were written by scientists who had at least 5 years experience studying the afterlife issue. And you will find overwhelming evidence for the scientific validation of continuation of conscious awareness after permanent bodily death at bigelowinstitute.org. Tremendous amount of information. Of course, our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, covers a lot of similar material and goes even further in terms of integrating it all into a model that works to explain the nature of reality, of eternity of soul, and that we're truly spiritual beings in a spiritual universe.
Amazing. Kelly, I know you have a burning question that you're dying to ask him about the life review, right? I can feel it.
Well, it's interesting. So the origin of my work I worked with a grief, and I actually started doing that after the loss of my friend Stephen in 2009. And that year, I call it the most awake year of my life, because I felt connected to something that I had not experienced before. And as I was reading the material, I realized that I had written something about that life review. It called it God's Special Reel of the Film. And I said, you kind of go into this theater and you're presented with how you have lived your life. And the cutting room floor is where you missed an opportunity to love someone, or you missed an opportunity to forgive someone. And it's just, I have to say, I'm so thankful for you, because it's validating for me that as I was writing that, I knew it was true. I knew that was the truth. And I always say that I was just the typist in that first year, as I was breathing. But I was so thankful for the wisdom that came with that. So the life review, what can you say to people about how they can think about their own life review without actually experiencing a near-death experience?
Well, I will tell you that my wife, my partner in all this work, the co-author of that book, Living the Mindful Universe, Karen Newell, has often reminded me of the daily review. Why save it for the end of your life? And this is something that's a very natural result, for example, of meditation, of regular meditation or centering prayer. For me, centering prayer and meditation are one and the same thing. I use a very powerful tool in the form of sacred acoustics binaural beat brainwave entrainment. We explain a lot of that in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe, about how this is such a powerful mode for helping to liberate your conscious awareness from the little ego mind. Important to point out that little voice in your head is not your consciousness. I love how Michael Singer, in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that voice in your head the annoying roommate. That's very, very important to get. That is not your consciousness. Your consciousness is your awareness of those thoughts. But in fact, that awareness has access to much grander aspects of self. And I'm sorry for your loss, but you're pointing out a beautiful aspect of that kind of tragedy of losing a loved one, is that often we are then gifted with some form of after-death communication, a great clarity that their soul is still here and is alive in the here and now. And it's not just wishful thinking. That's the important thing. There's so many examples of people getting very real and important information. For example, health information. I know a colleague of ours, Larry Burke, has written a book on premonitory dreams, and his book addressed just breast cancer, I believe, was the focus of it. But a number of cases where people had premonitory dreams, and I can say that often dreams like that involve a loved one who gives us that information that we need to go to the doctor, or that there's a mass in the breast or what have you. So it's not just kind of wishful thinking about, I wish I could reconnect with them, but often they come to us with useful, life important information, like, medical data that says, get this particular thing checked out. So the more we develop this relationship with kind of our higher soul, as I like to put it, and I promise you these differential frequency brainwave entrainment at Sacred Acoustics, people can learn more at sacredacoustics.com. But it's an incredibly powerful way of kind of letting that ego voice make a request, ask a question, but then at the beginning of the meditation, the ego voice just goes into timeout, as I've learned to ride the tones, coast with those tones. And what they seem to be doing is by creating an oscillation in the lower brainstem, and that's what the binaural beats are doing. It's a phenomenon that's been described for almost 200 years, where a pure tone in one ear and a slightly different pure tone in the other ear gives a strong signal that's equal to the arithmetic difference between the two. So if I put a 100 hertz tone in one ear and 104 hertz in the other ear, I'll get a 4 hertz wavering wah, 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 wah signal. And that is what I've learned to ride and just kind of blank my little ego mind, but let that kind of connection with higher mind. Basically, you're trying to get into a hypnagogic space. That is like the space between awake and asleep. And we know, from long experience, various inventors have used techniques of getting into that hypnagogic space when they had a deep question to answer. Like Thomas Edison, one of the greatest inventors. He was kind of a lead at General Electric in the early days with hundreds of patents. And he used to drift off to sleep with weights in his hands, and they'd wake him up as soon as he started to fall asleep. But just by getting those few seconds of micro naps, of hypnagogia between awake and asleep, all of a sudden he'd have these creative ideas. And he learned to really use that creativity, use that hypnagogic space. And sacred acoustics is a beautiful way to start to practice a way of getting into that hypnagogic space, which is really an overlap of your mind with the mind of the universe. So a great source of creativity, of insight, of understanding, of spiritual guidance, connecting with souls of departed loved ones. All these kind of things can happen in that hypnagogic space. And sacredacoustics.com, binaural beat brainwave entrainment, is an incredibly powerful and effective way for you to turn off the little ego mind, that little chatterbox monkey mind in the head, and start really pursuing your higher soul and that grander wisdom that comes from connecting with primordial mind. And these are all concepts that we cover in detail for both practical and theoretical implications in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe.
You mentioned ego, and I was just talking to Kelly this weekend about ego, and she has something phenomenal. I want you to tell him what you say about ego, Kelly.
I always say, I'm not really sure the origins of this. I feel like I met Wayne Dyer about 10 years ago, and I feel like it may have come from him. But I always call ego edging God. And, that's, you lose the perspective when you let ego come into that conversation, when you're living your life. And if you just move that out of the way, you open yourself up to the magic that is all around us that, sometimes we just fail to see.
Well, that is a very important point. I'm so glad you made that. In my journey, people who've read the book Proof of Heaven will realize, first of all, that it was amnesia was an unusual ingredient of my NDE. In fact, I've never heard of amnesia being that big a part of someone's near-death experience. But for me, I had no knowledge of Eben Alexander's life, no knowledge of humans, Earth, this universe. It really was an empty slate. And what I've discovered is that NDEs are always tailored for the individual that has them. They really have no other purpose. But when you study them en masse, we study big numbers of NDEs, we find a lot of commonalities. But in mine, it was unusual to have that amnesia, but it allowed for an extraordinary lesson for someone interested in neuroscience, phenomena of memory and consciousness to go through this, because it really defied most of my materialist preconceptions about it all and truly opened me to a far grander kind of vision of what this could all mean and where it was headed. But the amnesia allowed me to go into these many different levels, and I started in what I call the Earthworm Eye View, primitive, coarse, unresponsive, but then through a musical melody of light, a light portal was led up into this brilliant, ultra-real Gateway Valley. Now, that, of course, would be where life reviews would happen, that kind of area. That's where I had that beautiful guardian angel on the butterfly wing and this incredible beauty down below, kind of a world of perfection. There was no death or decay at all. And yet that was not the end point of my journey. There was a beautiful message from that spiritual guide on the butterfly wing. And of course, it was a discovery of her identity 4 months after my coma that drove home the reality of the experience. But importantly, that was only a stepping stone in my journey, because the angelic choirs that created such a sense of ultra reality in that Gateway Valley provided yet another light portal to higher and higher levels. And I saw all of four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of that deep ultra reality of what I call the Gateway Valley, that spiritual realm, collapsing down, until all I had was this complex oversphere that was basically the entire universe throughout all of eternity. And I was then in this core, as I called it, And the core was a complete oneness. All dualities come into oneness. We live in a world of dualities where you have masculine, feminine, dark, light, good, evil, et cetera, all these spectra of ranges of things. But in that core realm, it all came together into oneness. And not only that, I recognize that the very source of my conscious awareness was that pure God force of pure love. And that's why NDEs are so comforting. That's why more than 90% of people who have had an NDE across all cultures and belief systems, and this includes a lot of people who were previously atheist or agnostic, more than 90% of them come back knowing in the reality of a loving, personal, responsible intelligence at the core of the universe. And what I came to realize is it doesn't matter if you want to call that force God or Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit. These are all names of humans trying to claim it. But the deeper reality is we're all talking about the same infinitely loving, merciful, kind, focused, unconditionally loving presence of a God force. And that is what brings such comfort. But to me, the important thing is that was really the source of my conscious awareness. So none of us are ever separate in any way from that God force. It's always there in a very powerful form, right in the core of our awareness. But it helps to traverse that veil that connects us to the spiritual realm so that we are more into that oneness. And this is where, centering prayer and deep meditation can help any and all of us to get to the same kind of knowing and knowledge. You don't have to have an NDE. It certainly helps to have one as a touch point, but to even hear about NDEs is a great catalyst to help all the rest of us grow into this deeper spiritual truth. But we have the tools as a conscious, sentient being to explore consciousness through meditation and centering prayer. And that's where you start to discover that it's far grander than this little ego-focused, conscious awareness. It's only in the here and now in this body, but far grander than that. And that's where I think it's so important for all of us to reject that bleak and paltry fiction of materialism, that we're isolated individual sentient beings with no connection to the universe and to each other. And of course, this notion of spirituality also greatly encompasses the animal and plant kingdom. So don't think that animals don't have a rich kind of spiritual existence. I've heard many a story of people who are pet lovers who encounter their pets in beautiful ways in near-death experiences. So in fact, it's really as humans with our little ego mind, that linguistic brain, that we're led away from some of these spiritual truths that I think can be kind of obvious to animals. And that's why that whole predator-prey dance of animals eating animals is not as painful and horrific as we might think, is because the animals are used to the fact that they have a continuity of life, that they come back again and again. And this is something humans can realize, not just through NDEs, but, for example, through the work of Christopher Kerr, a hospice and palliative care doc in Buffalo, New York, who wrote a beautiful book about 5 years ago called Death is But a Dream. And he doesn't study NDEs at all. What he studies are people who are actually dying. And what he finds is exactly the same things happen. And they have elements of life review even in the weeks before they die. If they have kind of a prolonged death and not a sudden death, they go through dreams and visions where they reunite with souls who have left the world, and they go through resolution to where they make amends and apologies and express love and compassion and kindness, just like we often describe in NDEs and life reviews. But this is something that's a natural part of hospice and terminal care. So it's really part of the human condition. And it shows us, we are eternal spiritual beings. And this is a scientifically validated truth. And we're just getting more and more to a point where we have theoretical models. The philosophical position that I currently think is most on point is called evolutionary panentheism. Panentheism basically means that God force, that one mind of love, is through all of us, and it's what generates the emerging physical universe. Evolutionary means there's truly free will. And quantum indeterminacy from the world of quantum physics is what opens the door to actual free will, even though I think there are fascinating discussions about how much is determined and how much is due to our choices as sentient beings in determining our emergent worldview. And I think there's a lot of evidence for free will playing a tremendous role in our emerging reality. And it's not just a deterministic universe, which is what a lot of those materialists falsely believe.
I love that. It's so poignant. And you're talking about the golden rule, our not just our life reviews, but our daily reviews, right? The impact that we're creating. And Kelly talks a lot about the ripple effect. So powerful. But, I can't help but think you come from the scientific background. In my work, I work with a lot of people that are trying to share their story. Maybe they're afraid of criticism. Maybe they're afraid of rejection, that their peers, their colleagues are going to judge. I can't imagine this was easy for you, being from this neurosurgeon background, deeply scientific, to come out with this. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to explain this extraordinary recovery. I mean, that's what the peer review editors of the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases challenged the 3 authors who wrote the case report on my medical records. How do you explain it? This is unprecedented in the medical literature. And they said it's because he had a near-death experience. That is the explanation. It's simply scientific acceptance of the reality of this kind of miraculous healing. Now, interesting that in medicine, we look back over the last 7 or 8 decades, and we've been using placebo effect as the great gold standard for medical controlled trials. And placebo effect is much more than just a sugar pill fixing a headache. Placebo effect is an extraordinary demonstration of the power of human belief and will to influence our emerging reality. And if you go beyond, just placebo effect, and it's a kind of beautiful example of how somebody believing they're doing something to make them better can make them much better. And then you can work your way into the world of spontaneous remission of diseases. For example, if you go to noetic.org, Institute of Noetic's website, you'll find, put in the search term spontaneous remission, you'll find a book that they published in the mid-1990s. It was by, I think it's Hirschberg and O'Reilly or something like that. I might have the names wrong, but if you do that search, you can find it on the Noetic website. And they studied more than 3,500 cases of advanced cancers, advanced infections, what have you, where people had exhausted all the modern medical techniques available and were left with a disease that was out of control. And in those 3,500 plus cases, through prayer, meditation, through adopting a more kind of spiritual lifestyle, taking charge of their own health, sometimes changing their diet, things like that, you start to find this tremendous capacity for spontaneous remission of diseases. In fact, there's a beautiful book. It's called Radical Remission, where I think Kelly Turner wrote that. And she took more than 1,000 cases from that Noetic Sciences database that were all cancer. And she found the features that allowed them to overcome their cancer beyond any medical intervention. And 6 of the 9 features she identified were mainly spiritual, taking a spiritual approach to life, etc. But this is just showing us the power that we have with mind over matter and admitting to the spiritual realities that are revealed by these kind of cases. And when you move placebo effect, spontaneous remission, you then get to these extraordinary cases of healing in near-death experiences that completely defies Western medical expectations. And that's where we really just have to start taking seriously that our free will and our kind of spiritual identity can actually drive the bus and actually influence our healing. And it turns out, of course, none of us are meant to live forever. So we're all meant to leave this physical body in some way or form. But in prayer and meditation, we can seek that highest road. And what I have found is the more we're, adopting this beautiful sense of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, gratitude for self, and then serving as a conduit to share that out to our fellow beings. That kind of thing, you give love out to the world, and the love gives you love and healing back. And so that is what I think is most important about this, is all of this talk of consciousness and free will ultimately hinges on that beautiful power of love, binding force of love, which is tremendously healing to near-death experiencers. And that's why it's so important to share these stories. And you had talked about how it's, many people don't share these stories because people think they're crazy. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book Proof of Heaven, and I wrote it as a scientist, and it has a big bibliography full of scientific papers and books. That's why if you go to ebenalexander.com to my website, you'll find a recommended reading list that has a lot of scientific papers and books referenced in it. They're all categorized. Some of them are hot links to the actual scientific paper. And that recommended reading list will get you way on your way in terms of coming to a deeper understanding of all of this. But it's all supported by science. The religious community has had more than 5,000 years to try and teach us the golden rule that love is built into the fabric of this universe. And now ultimately it looks like it's going to be science, quantum physics, and the serious investigation of these kind of phenomena, including, investigation of telepathy, mind over matter, psychokinesis, remote viewing, all of these kind of extraordinary phenomena of consciousness that some people have very powerfully, but other people, and a lot of this is your beliefs. Be careful what you believe, because if you believe this is all nonsense, you'll never be able to discover it in yourself unless you get knocked in the head with, a soul who's passed who wants to knock some sense into you. And that's where after-death communications are so important. But ultimately, our beliefs, most of our societal beliefs in our modern culture are falsely limiting. And that's where it's so important to open our minds to these grander possibilities and ultimately to realize that, ego toxicity is not your friend. I will point out as a physician that alcoholism, addiction, drug addiction, and also addiction to things, sex, love, work, exercise. People can be addicted to a lot of things. And ultimately, addictions are where whatever this hyper focus is, it ends up kind of wrecking other parts of your life. And addiction is ultimately an ego disease. And this is where, turning it over to a higher power, like an AA programs that I'm familiar with from stopping alcohol back in 1991. It was never a problem for me at work, but it was something that on my nights off call, I leaned a little too heavily on that scotch. And I know a lot of people out there have addiction problems. And that's why I share that was part of my issue. Also that I was adopted. It's a giant part of my story if you read Proof of Heaven. In fact, it was only meeting my birth family a year before my coma that helped me when I received a picture in the mail 4 months after my coma from that birth family to finally connect the dots and go, oh my God, it actually happened. Identify that beautiful guardian angel on the butterfly wing. All these pieces are important because my adoption history is one of being put up for adoption at age 11 days. My birth mother was an unwed 16-year-old. And as far as I ever knew, my birth parents got separated in those moments. That was the end. They never got together. And then I found out in the year 2000 that they had gotten together. They got married and had 3 children, but that one of those children had already died, that my younger sister had passed over. And all that's a huge part of the story in Proof of Heaven. I won't dwell on it now, but important to point out that with my history of the alcoholism and successfully rising above it, and also the adoption wound, abandonment wound. I think even though for many people who are not adopted, we all have kind of a separation from spirit wound that comes in our modern culture with its focus on materialism and it's a kind of denial of our spiritual reality. And this is where waking up to the scientifically validated reality of spirituality, that we're spiritual beings that are interconnected. Reincarnation is a giant part of the picture. This is not just the visions people have in NDEs, but if you go to uvadops.org, that's the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, and start looking at their scientific papers, you'll find they've studied more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. And of those 2,500 cases, more than 1,700 have been solved over 6 decades. That is, solved means they found the person who lived before that the child is describing. Often the child gives names, very specific details about how they died in the previous life. In fact, a third of Ian Stevenson's original cases in that database, a third of them had birth defects and kind of limb abnormalities that were related to the mode of death in the prior incarnation. If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. But the bottom line is, our materialist thought that the brain creates consciousness and at bodily death, our awareness ceases to exist is completely false and not supported by all the scientific evidence. And for those who worry a bit about reincarnation, I can tell you it's still the goal of love, kindness, and compassion. It's just that it takes more than one lifetime for us to work towards that oneness with the divine and that sense of universal love. But it's always still the same. NDEs are clear on this point. There's a beautiful book by a friend of mine, Robert Koppes, Koppes from the Netherlands. He's very familiar with near-death experiences. He wrote a book called The Essence of Religions, where he compares the top main 5 religions in the world today, Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as well as Hinduism, Buddhism. And basically, the gold standard is near-death experiences. And he kind of says how each of those approaches the beauty of near-death experiences and their focus on life reviews and the golden rule being written into the fabric of the universe, but none of them gets it perfectly right. This is why, we shouldn't be so consumed by religious ideologies. We should focus more on prayer and meditation and what is revealed to us in these deep states of exploration, and especially through spontaneous cases of near-death experiences, shared death, which are just like near death, but happen in perfectly healthy people. They might be loved ones 1,000 miles away, but the departing soul will grab their soul on the way out, even to the point of seeing a full-blown life review before the bystander soul comes back to this world. So all of this points to a much grander reality. We're trying to open the door so people will share these stories much more widely. You can go to IANDS.org, International Association of Near-Death Studies.org, to see thousands and thousands of commonly reported NDE cases and similar cases. Also, NDERF.org, an excellent source run by Jody and Jeff Long. He's a physician, radiation oncologist, who's now in Kentucky. NDERF.org is their website. Many NDEs reported there, and a lot of information for the public about NDEs. But these are really waking the scientific community and our culture at large up to the absolute, undeniable reality of our spiritual essence, our interconnection, the binding force of love, and the spiritual nature of the universe.
Kelly, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay,
I know. Me too.
So I just have to tell you, so I am a registered nurse. I come from a nursing background. And everything that you've said, just based on my own professional experience and then personal experience with law, I don't even really, I'm at a loss for words, but I want to just read the quote that I read this morning as I was preparing to talk to you. It's from Nikola Tesla. The day that science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of existence. So as a registered nurse, I recall sitting by patients' beds as they were getting ready to pass and staying with them. Primarily, my areas of focus were intensive care, emergency room nursing, and oncology nursing. So the spectrum of loss, I think, prepared me for the journey that I'm on now. There was just things that I could not explain as people were passing. There was things that I could not explain about a person's recovery in an oncology setting that had a very poor prognosis, but their mindset was completely different than a patient who had the same prognosis. And so put those two patients together, and the person who had the mindset and who was meditating and focused on healing, that their outcomes were. And I never really had, like, I wasn't doing a professional study, so it was just all the observations that I made through the year. And I'm just at a loss, because everything that you said is just so validating and I'm sure for so many other registered nurses out there, because, in my community, I connected so many of them, and we all have those questions, and we see what is happening. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation finally as part of what makes up our healing movement. So
thank you, Kelly, for sharing every bit of that. And I will tell you that many, many times in my talks over the last 15 years since this experience, I credit the nurses with getting it, because I had many nurse friends, very dear friends of mine who I worked with, who would tell me these kinds of incredible stories that suggested a richness of spirituality and of the power of spirit to influence healing. I was such a hardcore kind of, I want to be able to measure it, materialist mind, that I wasn't paying attention to what they were telling me. But you're absolutely right. And I would say nurses are more commonly present when people pass from this world. I think as physicians, sometimes maybe we feel like we failed our patients. If they're just about to die, we might not be as present. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself. But I think nurses have figured this out a long time ago, because they keep seeing this kind of evidence. And of course, I have a few stories in my book, Proof of Heaven, of terminal lucidity and that kind of thing, and also of after-death communications, where families and nursing staff were trying to share this stuff with me to help me grow up into a much more mature view of the nature of reality. And yet my hardcore materialist preconceptions and assumptions were interfering with my admitting to the obvious evidence. And that's why I think it's so important that the scientific community is now taking these cases very seriously and studying them rigorously, because then you start to connect the dots in ways that are very, very powerful and that have huge implications for our understanding. But the emerging reality is absolutely one of shared spirit, where we're really all bound together through these forces of love, and that we're here to help each other and to take care of the least, the last, and the lost. We should be taking in refugees, as a nation, as individuals. We need to help people. And that's really a crucial part of humanity's survival, is denying that kind of paltry fiction of the false sense of separation, and that, he who gets the most toys before they die wins, that kind of materialist nonsense, and start working towards the deeper spiritual reality pointed out by these kind of stories, these kind of experiences, and the scientific validation of them, that helps us get to a point of recognizing these deeper spiritual truths and notions of oneness. And so doing all this can help us not only as a society, as these stories are more widely shared, as scientists, and I can give two websites of scientists who are deeply into this understanding for your viewers. Go to scientificandmedical.net or go to galileocommission.org, and you'll find two groups. I'm on the scientific advisory group board for both groups. But you'll find that entertaining quantum physics, parapsychology, all this evidence for non-local consciousness, all of these stories of human experience, reincarnation, NDEs, etc., we're painting a much bigger picture of reality that in many ways is comforting and also offers us the chance for free will as individuals. So yes, it's important to share these stories and these theoretical models with the world at large in books like Living in a Mindful Universe, but also incredibly important for individual souls to go through this journey. And if you go to ebenalexander.com, you'll find that there's a companion workbook to that Living in a Mindful Universe. This workbook is free. It's a 33-day email campaign where if you leave your first name and an email address for the next 33 days, each day you will get a key concept from our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And this is presented in a community format so that More than 12,000 people have taken that course over the last few years. They leave their comments. They help each other. It's all right there at your 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness, which is right on the welcome page at ebenalexander.com. So anybody can jump on that 33-day journey and start learning a lot more. The other resource I like to point out is a website that was really Karen Newell's brilliance. My wife and the co-author of Living in a Mindful Universe, and that is called innersanctumcenter.com. That's INNER sanctumcenter.com, and you'll find there many things. For one, we did more than 50 interviews during the pandemic with thought leaders around the world on consciousness studies and other experiencers. All of those 50-some interviews are available for free at innersanctumcenter.com. Likewise, there's a mental health practitioner course. This does have a cost associated, but it's a very good course on spirituality and modern mental health practice. Karen and I did that course with Dr. Anna Yusum. She is a brilliant psychiatrist from New York City. She wrote a book called Fulfilled, which I highly recommend. And she did that mental health practitioner course with us to help people mainly with anxiety and with spiritual issues. It turns out that Dr. Yusum also wrote a peer-reviewed study, a pilot study of sacredacoustics.com, especially the Whole Mind Bundle at sacredacoustics.com, where she found that over 2 weeks of time, her busy Manhattan practice with a lot of anxious patients showed a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms just by listening to Sacred Acoustics. Whereas the control group, who got standard talk therapy for anxiety, only had a 7% reduction over those 2 weeks. So 26% just by listening to Sacred Acoustics is very powerful. And if you listen to Sacred Acoustics, you'll see what I mean. That Whole Mind Bundle, Karen put on sale at the beginning of the pandemic. That's when that Dr. Yusum's her pilot study came out in January of 2020, I think it was, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And that's a Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease. So you can learn a lot more about it. But that Whole Mind Bundle is still available at a very discounted price. In fact, I think Karen knew that the anxiety of the pandemic and the economic collapse of the pandemic would be so severe that she left a free button on the website at sacredacoustics.com to give that Whole Mind Bundle to people who needed it for free out of her generosity to the world. And I believe that is still there. Of course, we expect that people who have financial means will pay the discounted $19 to get that Whole Mind Bundle. But you'll find it can be incredibly important and powerful. And then, of course, start exploring more of Sacred Acoustics, because there is an unbelievable amount of power to what these tones can do to help people come into their own self-healing.
Wow. Well, I'm going to be that later.
Oh, sorry, Karen. I have used binaural beats. I use them daily as I'm writing, working, and meditating. And I can attest to the power of them. It's just completely changed my perspective. It's my anxiety has lessened. It's amazing. And I also have lived with transformational breath work, which is, I'm just getting into that, but that is such an interesting field as well, to connecting yourself to a higher consciousness. So all of these tools are so important. I'm just thinking about the length of my reading list after chatting with you. I've got a lot of work to do.
Well, it's all play. I look at it as play. This is fascinating stuff. And the more you realize that it heads to a much more positive life, and one where you feel like you have a true influence on your emerging reality. I mean, this is an incredible revolution just in kind of human thought and human abilities and acknowledgement of our power. I think within the next decade, just as Tesla said in that beautiful quote you read earlier, science will discover far more than we have in all the centuries of our existence, as this kind of knowledge of the power of mind over matter expands and as more and more people explore their own potential.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That was a mic drop moment. Well, with that, I want to just say thank you. I'm very grateful for your presence today, for teaching us this. I know I learned a lot. I know our audience is has learned a lot, and there's so much depth to the human soul, folks. So much infinite potential within all of us. And this just goes to show us how much potential we truly have. But most importantly, I feel like how loved we actually are.
That is true. It's all about love. The more we can serve as a conduit for that love and bring it into this universe, share it with our fellow beings, the better off we all are. Thank you so much for what you do to get this out there.
Thank you, Eben. And thank you for everyone who tuned in. Don't forget to support each of our podcasts and tune in and share this with someone. This is truly a life-changing and life-saving message. So the more we share, the better off we can all be and help each other and rise as a collective. This is not just about helping ourselves, but how we can ultimately help each other. So thank you so much, Eben. Thank you, Kelly. It was a pleasure today. This was fun.
Great. Thanks so much, both of you.
Thank you. We will catch you on the next episode. Take care.
Good.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Grasp Confidence. Thank you for joining me today and investing in yourself. Remember, building confidence is an ongoing journey, and each step you take brings you closer to the empowered, fearless version of yourself that you were born to be. Don't forget to visit my website, follow me on social media, and purchase my book, which is available on Amazon. Thank you for listening. We will see you on the next episode. Stay confident.